Well, welcome everybody to Wise Lives. My name is David Sisson. I am the new head of ops at the Well Church here in Sheffield. And today the tables have been turned. I have with me, hiding in the background, these lovely people here. They're going to be joining me in just a moment as we dig into their latest book, which is the XYZ of Discipleship. You see what they've done there, the little ABC. So this is going to be exciting. This is something that's very dear to their heart. They're very passionate about discipling this generation. And I thought that would be perfect for the Wise Lives podcast, because here we actually get to unpack a little bit about what it means to live a wise and godly life. And discipleship is obviously a huge part of that. And so as leaders, we have a huge part to play in how we are ourselves discipled and fed and how we disciple other people. So I'm really excited right now to be able to bring in Nick and Marjorie Allan, who are themselves, of course, not at all unfamiliar with this format. How are you guys doing today?
Hi, David. Yeah, it's kind of, as you say, it's kind of weird to have the tables turned and to be interviewed instead on Wise Lives, but it's a great pleasure to see you.
That's fantastic. How are you, Marjorie? You well?
I'm well. I'm really well. The sun is shining outside, and it's nice to see you, David.
Good. Well, we are here today because we're going to be talking about the book that you guys have just written. And when's the release date again?
So right now, David, pretty much. I mean, we're recording this at the beginning of May 2020. We're in lockdown at the moment, which is why we're all on headphones and so on. And so the book comes out to mainstream shops the middle of May. You can
Good. There it is
purchase
again.
it from all your online retailers and so on, or it's available already from the website that you'll see at the end of this.
That's fantastic. So, of course, you guys have been leading the Well now for 5 years, I think, since its inception, since its birth. And you guys, of course, have been leading these generations that you refer to, generations X, Y, and Z, and possibly even some boomers as well in there for many years. And now at the Well, you felt the need to write this book. Marjorie, would you just share a little bit as to why you felt the need for this book in this time?
I guess it came about, well over a year and a half ago, we were involved in lots of discussion and analysis with church leaders across the nation, looking at the reality of Generation Y in particular, the millennial generation, being missing from the UK church, and maybe the consequences for that for the church of today and the long-term future consequences of that. And there was a lot of conversation around that. And I think something really stirred in me to understand that more. And I think at the same time, there was a conversation why looking at the ways in which these guys were missing from the church, but also looking at the significant role they were playing in culture. And there was a lot of analysis going on about Generation Y and Generation Z at the time. And I think I often felt as well that they were the misunderstood generation. So a lot of stereotypes, a lot of negativity, and something stirred in me that actually that is the wrong approach. If we are going to love them and see them discover how much they're loved by a God in heaven who loves them and disciple them, we have to turn the tables on this conversation, and we need to understand this generation, and we need to understand culture today in the UK. So that was a little bit of what stirred for me. How can we understand things more? And at the same time, I think I was in a context of seeing a huge amount of hope. So as we started this new church plant in the city centre of our city here in Sheffield, we were seeing young people turn to God.
Yeah.
And we were seeing young people hungry for God. And I was hearing that, they don't do church, they don't do God. This is the secular generation. And that was not my experience. I was thinking, no, that is not the case. They are really hungry for God. And we are seeing people turn to God. And yes, their lives are messy and they haven't been used to church. And it's quite a journey to disciple some of these young people. But it's been the ride of our lives, what we've seen God do over these recent years. And I think that sense of wanting to join the dots for people, learn from others as well. There are some really encouraging stories across our nation of churches and contexts where they are reaching young people and seeing them choosing to become radical disciples of Jesus. And we wanted to learn more as well. So we've loved the journey of research.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We've kind of found ourselves surrounded by young adults for, I guess, the last 15 or 20 years in church. And so it's thinking, well, rather than just bring information to the UK church, let's inspire people as well to realize that you can do this yourselves. This isn't I don't think it's any more difficult or different to disciple our young generations today than it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 2,000 years ago. Some of the context is different, of course it is, but people's hearts remain the same, and the good news of Jesus is still the same if you work out how to apply it to the particular culture that you find yourselves in.
I think one of the things was as well, it was to be about discipleship. And so I was hearing lots of conversations of even church leaders asking, how can we grow our church? How can we see young people in church? And I began to think that's not the real question.
It's not the question, yeah.
The real question is, how do we raise disciples, which is a completely countercultural reality in the current culture, works against discipleship, but is totally possible.
Yeah,
we have seen that
really
to be
is.
the case.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, Marjorie, you actually even kind of referred to it then. I think churches up and down the country, and probably, I've spent time abroad. I mean, I see this across churches all around the world, have seen, a real dip in the younger generations wanting to be at church. I want to just quote was a very slight paraphrase. One of the things I think in chapter 3 where you guys have said Generation Z are, I say Z, there you go, I'm from America. 8 years in America will do that to you. Generation Z are more curious about the supernatural because they are so post-Christian. But you guys have observed that actually there is a spiritual openness and a hunger in Britain's unchurched generation. And also, I think there's a bit of a distinguished, the word evades me, but how do we distinguish between the unchurched generation, but also there's this reference to the secular generation? And what's the difference between those two, and how have you seen that at play in this aspect of spiritual hunger and desire?
Just as I think Marjorie wants to jump in on that one. Just to say as well, it's worth defining what we mean by generations Y and Z, because those are the kind of terms that you hear a lot in the media and so on. So Generation Y, effectively the millennials, they're not a new generation. In fact, they range from probably about age 24 up to about 39 now. So kind of each generation is roughly about a 15-year span. And so they're kind of really embedded in our culture today. Many of them are in the workplace and so on. They're actually beginning to lead the Western cultures now. And Generation Z, we're talking about people from about 23 down to about 8 or 9 years old, so still at school, and then the teenagers, and then the top end of student age. So a little bit difficult still to put a finger on what those generations are like, because that Generation Z hasn't yet kind of completely come out of its shell. But that's who we're talking about. So if you want to dig in on...
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you about a conversation, a narrative that we have heard time and time again that I think sums it up. We've had lots of teens, so maybe 18, 19 or early 20 age, walk into our church building, or we've met them out on the streets as we have engaged in street evangelism. And the conversation has gone something like this. Oh, I've never been to church. Or this is my first time in church. My family have never done church. I don't know anything about the Bible. But my grandparents, yes, I'm remembering my grandparents did church. They did faith. My granny had faith. She prayed. And I've been thinking about that recently. And I've been thinking maybe I'd like to try faith. And as the conversation has progressed, and it's happened time and time again, what essentially they are communicating is, my parents have been atheists. My family have maybe been de-churched or completely unchurched. And it hasn't necessarily worked out so well for them. And they aren't the foundations I necessarily want for my life or my future or my children. So I'm rethinking the possibilities in a culture that offers you multiple possibilities. And that's where I think it's so exciting for us as the Church of the UK to sit up and really wake up to the reality. This generation, this younger generation, is very spiritually hungry. we need to be careful that we're not listening to media headlines that they're not interested, they don't do church, because that is actually not our experience. We have moved away from that.
So they don't necessarily do church in itself. We would describe them as unchurched rather than a secular generation. In other words, there's this innate kind of spiritual hunger, an openness to the supernatural. I'll give you an example. This week in the news in Britain, a survey was done by Tear Fund, and it found that 1/4 of the UK population had prayed in April 2020. This is obviously during the COVID-19 crisis, and that the people who prayed the most within that bracket were the 18 to 35-year-old bracket, and that's actually showed out in lots of the different research that we did, and some of it's in the book, and so there's this kind of experiential thing, isn't there, about generations Y and Z, who they want to see it, they want to taste it, and it's kind of taste and see that the Lord is good. And so we do one or two things, don't we? We often will go out on the streets and offer prayer for healing or an encounter with God that people are very receptive to. That it's I wouldn't ever be put off and worry that people will say that the worst they can say is no. But actually, when you say, would you like me to pray for you? Would you like an encounter with the living God? 9 times out of 10, most people will say, yeah, actually, I'm open to that idea.
We had a lovely story recently of a young guy, really bright guy, studying the sciences here in Sheffield. And he came to ask us with real sincerity, is it possible that I could be experiencing God and yet not be quite sure if I believe in God yet? And we said, yes, totally. You're experiencing the love of God. It's what the Spirit of God does. And I love just to watch that happen. And I think it's worth mentioning, David, that I think Western urban culture has engaged with secularism, on a global level now, and found it to be wanting. It doesn't answer the questions, particularly at a time like we've been in recently with COVID-19, life and death situations. Secularism has no framework for a conversation involving death and the afterlife and hope. And that causes people to ask more questions and to spiritually wake up. And I think that's a key time for the church in the UK at this time.
It's just a matter of having confidence and going there with these subjects. We've found that young adults have come in and they will say, I haven't been to church forever, perhaps never, but I'm open to the idea. It's almost like there's a fusion student movement in the UK, have a hashtag called Try Church. Hashtag Try Church. And it's that kind of thing these days, isn't it? It's like, yeah, actually, we're open to that. We're open to prayer. We're open to the possibility that there's the supernatural. And so rather than being afraid of that and walking around that, we just go there these days with young adults that we meet.
That's fantastic. I love that. It is amazing, isn't it? I mean, the season we're in, we are talking like this rather than sat in the studio because, of course, we are, bang slap in the middle of this outbreak of COVID-19, and I think you're right. My observation has been also that secularism has worked great for generations as long as life's going great, and as soon as challenges come and things get a little bit harder, the reality is, as you've said, it is wanting, and I love that. I want to talk a little bit about how we find that language. The use of language, particularly in generations, often defines cultures. And we look at TV shows of past generations and we see how some of the language in those things has helped define and shape that culture. And I think right now for these current generations, these are the generations that have lived around emojis and memes, and we look at how that language has defined that culture. And one of the chapters that you guys have written has a really catchy little title, but you basically reference two little phrases, little memes. One is YOLO, and the other one is FOMO. So why don't you break that down a little bit to us and let us know, what on earth is that all about?
All right. So FOMO is short form for fear of missing out. And YOLO is a short form for you only live once, which usually comes with a bit of a kind of sassy kind of let's just do it kind of attitude that comes behind it. But FOMO is a real thing. It's not just a bit of fun. It's not just a meme. It's actually an experience, particularly of the millennial generation and those guys coming up into Gen Z now, whereby people live with this kind of tension that actually I'm supposed to be having the best time ever. And we live in an Insta generation. There are the Insta famous. There are people who are projecting an image all the time of perfection, beautiful bodies, beautiful lives, beautiful food, having a great time. And you see it all on Instagram and on Facebook, on TikTok, and all the rest of that stuff. And it's true, but it's not true. And everybody knows that. But there's this kind of innate, not innate. People experience this tension between everybody else appears to be having a great time, and I don't feel like I am, or I don't feel like I live up to it. I'm not as cool as everybody else. But also, it's not just that. There's actually quite a pressure on people to feel like they're doing the right thing and the best thing in the moment, and not wasting time. And I guess that kind of feeds, in a sense, into you only live once. Let's just do it. It doesn't matter if it hurts me or if it's bad for my health. I'm just going to do it because you only live once, right? And so that is a real thing for people, and we come across that regularly. And one of the ways that it plays itself out, particularly in millennials that we spent time with, is actually in making decisions. And so it's almost like there are too many choices out there in the world. We live in this multi-choice world now, from anything from what you want to watch on a streaming TV to which church, frankly, you might engage with. And actually making a decision and sticking with it can be quite challenging. And so one of the things we talk about a little bit is actually helping put a little bit of scaffolding around how mentors, people of different generations maybe, or friends, can help each other to process a decision or a choice, do it in a godly way, work through a process of kind of have you thought about that? Have you thought about its implications? And come to a decision and actually stick with a decision for a while. That doesn't mean that people won't do lots of things. The average time in a job today for today's 20-somethings is about 2 years. And we see that all the time. People chop and change. But there's something about, the Apostle Paul will talk about how perseverance builds character and so on and so forth. And there's something about helping Christians, if you're building disciples, to make decisions about the kingdom of heaven. So there are lots of choices to be made, and what job do I do? Who do I go out with? And everything in between. What should I do at the weekend? But the main question is, how do I follow Jesus in all of these choices? And so we're actually helping people to think, rather than a fear of missing out, what about a fear of missing out on the kingdom of heaven? Because these guys are passionate about causes as well. They want to change the world. The Gen X, we have children who are Gen Z children, and they're being brought up to believe that they can make a difference, they can change the world, and they want to, and that's fantastic. And you look at people like Greta Thunberg and so on. She's like 16 and she started a global movement for the environment. Amazing. And so there's something for us as Christians and as people who maybe mentor, maybe of different generations, older generations and so on, in saying, hey guys, here's a cause that you can sign up to. This is the greatest cause that the world's ever seen. In fact, it's to change the world for the better, for the kingdom of heaven. It will change you and it will change the world. And so we try and help people to dig into that as well.
And I think the life of a disciple just so answers the ache of the heart of this generation, the desire for life to count, for my life to find meaning, to go on an adventure, to have an experience. There's nothing like the kingdom of God for all those things. And really, as those involved in discipleship, what we're actually doing is helping join the dots for people, painting a picture of the big story of God's plan, the kingdom of heaven, and our place within it, and giving that invitation. That's why, as we engage in evangelism, we love actually to go out with a theme or a heading that we're inviting people to come home. That's a language, when you talk about language, David, for today's culture, that we find to be very effective. Instead of saying to people, there's something you're missing, or you've made a mistake, you've messed up, you've sinned, instead we're saying, do you know who you are? Yeah. Do you know there's a Father in heaven who loves you?
Or who you could become.
Or who you could become, and come home.
It's not to say that you don't mention, sin and all that sort of stuff. At some stage that's appropriate. And I think the other thing with discipleship and FOMO particularly actually is about surrender, helping people, young adults, to realize that if you get to grips with your identity in God, you can afford to surrender your ways to Him. And that's, nobody wants to do that. I mean, let's be honest. No, that's hard for everybody, or however old you are. So it's helping people to surrender to God in the security that He loves you. He's your Father in the heavens. He really loves you. You can afford to give your life away and to find His.
And that one, interestingly, is so countercultural, because this is the age of the selfie. It's me, I'm king. Maybe a few generations ago, human nature is always the same. We've always been self-centered, but now we don't even have to hide it. Here I am.
You're at the centre of most of the photos you might ever take.
Yeah, me and my photo, and these are my thoughts, these are my feelings, and truth is determined by what I think and my experience. And discipleship to Jesus is always about dethroning ourselves. The selfie gets put down. And so we have a chapter in the book actually about how culture is drawn to the kingdom. The things of the kingdom are very attractive, joy and peace and security, but often we want the kingdom and not necessary to surrender to the king. We want the kingdom without the king. And really we have such a role as those who follow Jesus already to help people understand the pathway to the kingdom is to fall in love with the king. And that does involve that same process of surrendering that Nick's been talking about, that he is king and I'm not.
Yeah. No, I absolutely love that. I was actually just thinking as you were talking a little bit. I mean, when my wife and I, Susan, we are discipling, often the conversation comes up, and decision fatigue is a real thing. We actually think, well, this is great. Whether I'm becoming more middle class or whatever it is, I've got more options available to me, more money. But the problem is that often that comes with more stuff. And I mean, even this week, whether we think it's a midlife crisis or not, here we have Elon Musk, one of the richest men in the world, multiple companies, saying, I'm kind of done with this, wanting to sell all his houses off because really there's too much going on in his life. And it's quite amazing, really, that we actually see a generation that the values are shifting within this generation, I feel. And this generation has a real sense or really a demand for justice, to seek justice. In a way, I think that generations in the past, we've recognized things from afar, but been quite happy to let government deal with it, and the people that do this kind of thing deal with it. But you talk a little bit about this tolerance and versus kind of transformation, and of course, ultimately, if surely we want to see transformation in the life of the people we're discipling. Not just a tolerant people. Can you unpack all of that a little bit for us?
Sure thing. Your example about Elon Musk is interesting, because what he's really saying is he's searching for significance there rather than success, and he must be fairly old, I think now, or a little bit older. But that's what this generation are growing up with. They're saying we're not going after success, we're going after significance. We have a short time on life and we want to make it count. And that whole justice agenda, that kind of thing that rises up naturally from this generation as they actually look at a lot of injustice in the world and imbalance. We have to see that as kingdom seeds. That's the kingdom of heaven. That's part of who God is. His heart beats for justice, his heart beats for the poor, and for equality amongst people, because he created all people. And so I think it's really important that we don't just see that as a fad or as a kind of generational trait. That's the kingdom of heaven being displayed in the generation that are coming through in the West, and that's really important. And as a church, we need to be humble enough to listen to that. And I'll give you a very quick example. There are people in the Sheffield where we are, and some of the young adults, they've told us, for example, that they don't want to fly again at the moment, apart from the fact that we're not allowed to fly because we're all locked down. But even when that's lifted, they were saying, because of the environmental impact, I'm willing to not fly, even for my holidays and so on. And that's putting their money where their mouth is, and you have to admire that. And so there's the whole environmental agenda as well. I think it's really important that as churches and as disciples, we listen humbly, and the church in the UK listens and doesn't think that it knows all the answers, but actually seeks to work with these generations and what's coming through. So that's really important. As you say, there's always a balance. There's always a balance or a tension with the way that Jesus approaches things, because his agenda isn't always the same as the world's. And so I think as much as we are tolerant and based on justice, Jesus also and inclusivity. Jesus was radically inclusive to the people that he invited into the kingdom of heaven. And those people that he invited, he also invited them to a transformation. Every single one of them. They were perhaps outcast or unusual in their own society. And he said, I want you to join a new society, a new civilization, a new kingdom, the kingdom of heaven. But your invitation is to become like Jesus. And so what I see in Jesus in the way that he operates is that he welcomes people as they are, but he loves them so much, too much, always, to leave them as they are. And the invitation is to a transformation of heart, of mind, of action, of soul, of purpose, of future, of identity. I mean, it's certainly our experience that our identity has been transformed as we've understood who we are as children of God. And so I think one of the things that I try and work through with people in generations Y and Z is to say, that's amazing that you want to be radically inclusive. What does it look like in the kingdom of heaven to be radically inclusive? What kind of a person can I be becoming? And am I allowing the possibility that God might want to change me? Because inclusivity isn't the same as just kind of stay as you are. It's kind of actually allow God to change you if it fits to the Bible. And the last thing I'd say on that is that there's we can also help people to provide a kind of biblical, ethical framework, because lots of today's questions are very complex and they're not in the Bible, but the Bible speaks into them, and there's something about helping young adults to become familiar with the Bible, the text of the Bible, and its ethical approach to understand how to answer today's questions. You want to carry on?
Yes, I mean, I think that whole message of transformation is really countercultural again, but it is central to the message of discipleship. I remember somebody once questioned me after I had spoken in church, are you suggesting that people need to change or should change? And my answer to that would be, we're all changing here. It's impossible to really meet Jesus and not be changing. Now, obviously, that requires a lot of sensitivity and navigation with people. I love to use a language that we're learning to journey alongside people. I think that's really important. This generation doesn't like to be told what to do. It doesn't like to be preached at. Nope. You get the tone wrong and you'll lose.
And you have to live with your own integrity, don't you? They're looking to see, are you authentic? Can I trust does it work out in your life as much as what you're saying to my life?
But journeying alongside people, sharing from your life, also being willing to listen to them and their experiences and their opinions with integrity. Like really listen, not with fingers in our ears thinking we know better, but just walking in that humility. I think if we have that approach, we gain open doors to people's hearts and minds, and that's just a huge privilege.
That's amazing. Well, guys, I want to thank you for joining me today on
Thanks for having
your
us,
podcast.
Pleasure.
Thanks for interviewing us.
Yeah, it's been fun.
It's been great to have you with us. So thank you for taking the time to do that.
It's great.
Yeah.
Thanks,
you. David. Yeah.
So everyone, I just want to say thank you for joining us. It's been great to have you all with us. I just want to remind you, if you want to get hold of a copy of this book, then you can find out more by going to XYZDiscipleship.com. And you can find out more there. You can purchase it from Amazon, I believe, but also through the site. And I believe also it's available as an ebook. So that's really exciting there. So the XYZ of Discipleship by Nick and Marjorie Allan. And of course, we'd love for you to continue to subscribe to Wise Lives and share the message of discipleship. So thank you for joining us. And I hope you have a real blessed rest of your day. Thanks so much, guys.